Everyone, we're back here on the Whirling Circles Internal Martial Arts Podcast. I'm Shawn Garcia, of course, joined every week by Frank Allen of the Wudang PCA. So we've been having a couple of great episodes going over history. We're going to keep that going, but we're going to shift gears a little bit this week, and we're getting back to specifically talking about Baguazhang, but we're going to be talking about even more specifically the weapons that are part of the system. Some of them that are unique to the system. Some of them, of course, that are shared in other systems. But it's a pretty cool history, and I think a little unique to Bagua, which we'll get into, because it kind of what it seems like a weapon stems from a certain lineage. But we'll get into that. But how you feeling, Frank?
I'm feeling okay. It just dawned on me, Shawn. I don't know if we've ever explained to people what PCA is. You keep saying Wudang PCA. It's Physical Culture Association. That's
Yeah,
what the
I think I might have
PCA
mentioned it
is.
once, but you're right. I always say the abbreviation. That's true. Where'd you come up
Yeah,
with the
and
name
we
for the
got
Wudang?
because the Qingwu in Shanghai is sometimes referred to as the Qingwu Physical Culture Association. And that was the first place to start teaching Chinese martial arts for the reasons that we do it, for self-defense, for recreation, for social gatherings. Before the Qingwu, martial arts schools were vocational schools. You went to a martial arts school because you wanted to get a job as a bodyguard, a security guard, a cargo guard, or you wanted to be able to pass the test to improve your rank in the military. They're vocational schools
Mm.
before the Qingwu. And the Qingwu was started by, I think it was Hoyanja, who was the famous lost track stylist, who, of course, the famous Jet Li movie Fearless is all about him and the
Oh, cool.
founding of the Qingwu. But and it's been referred to as the Qingwu this, the Qingwu that. But back when I was starting this, I saw something they referred to it as the Qingwu Physical Culture Association. I'm, hey, that's a good idea. I
Yeah.
think we'll do that. And as I mentioned, we've had various stuff. We've got our Chinese martial arts. We've also had Western boxing. At one point, we had an arm wrestling team. We had grappling of various types. Um, so, Physical Culture Association seemed like a good description for us.
Yeah, for sure. I remember when I first heard the name, I immediately, as a young hip hop kid, I thought about the Wu Tang Clan, and everyone always thinks the Wu Tang, or that they're like, oh, is that named after Wu Tang? I'm like, no, no, Wu Tang Clan is named after the Wudang because of their admiration and love for Chinese martial arts. So that's where the Wu Tang
Actually,
name comes from.
actually, the rap group came from there. A bunch of kids from Staten Island who
Mm-hmm.
went to the kung fu movies on 42nd Street all the time.
Exactly right.
And the
Yep.
kung fu movies have been built up the erroneous thing of Wu Tang versus Shaolin, which was
Yeah.
never a reality, ever, ever. But the kung fu movies, maybe some of the wuxia stories from China also had this, and they happened to pick it up to become the Wu Tang Clan. And of course, we'd been going for over a decade when they appeared, and they're like, oh no. But how long can they last? I mean, they're a little rap group from Staten Island. How long can they last? They'll be out of our hair soon. Little do we know that RZA turns out to be an actual musical genius.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, we're stuck with him forever because he's an actual musical genius. Although I do get a big kick out of RZA, the head of the Wu Tang Clan, studied with Shi Ming, the Shaolin monk. That was his at least
That's
was
funny.
his teacher.
Did you
Yeah,
see those movies that he did a couple years ago? Those kung fu movies. The Iron Fist, was it Iron Fist or
yeah, yeah,
Iron?
yeah. Yeah, Iron Fist.
Yeah,
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 I liked him.
yeah. They were
I
pretty
thought they.
good.
I mean, Riz is a genius in a
Yeah,
lot of stuff. I mean, the other guys, a bunch of them have gone exactly where we thought they would.
yeah, yep, yep.
But
That's right.
RZA
Yeah,
turned out to be an overall genius, a musical genius, and he's really good at filming stuff. I mean, I remember when he first appeared in Ghost Dog, the Jim Jarmusch
oh man,
film
Ghost Dog is
with,
so good.
yeah, and he did the music, and then they have that one scene where he and Forrest Whitaker walk past each other.
Yeah. No, yeah. If people have never seen Ghost Dog with Forrest Whitaker, you have to check that out. That's such a great, amazing movie. Underrated, but I remember when I was studying film, I was just in love with the Ghost Dog and the way they filmed it and everything. It was awesome. But yeah, we were gonna talk about Bagua weapons, and now we're doing hip hop history. For those
Yeah,
who
and then
didn't realize.
movies. We gotta have to do a show on movies someday.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. All right, cool. So tell us about weapons. What weapons are unique to Bagua? Where do you want to start with this?
Well, the whole thing is in kung fu training, as is done today, it's all about the empty hands. But the reality was when it was a vocational training, it was all about the weapons.
Mm,
That you learned empty hand training to get the basic fundamentals of the movement, the basic fundamentals of the ideology, and the basic strategies of the art. But as far as your vocational training, soldiers, security guards, bodyguards, cargo guards, they were not going to work empty handed. Going to work empty handed wouldn't work out so well. So it was really all about the weapons, with the empty hand being to learn the fundamentals, and of course, challenge matches, which get more famous than regular work, were done empty hand. Like Yang Banho was probably the best empty hand Tai Chi fighter in history with the challenge matches that he did, Yang Luchan's oldest son. But his father and his brother were famous for their spear, which came a
mm.
lot more handy for training the Imperial Guards. So weapons are really were the most important part of the training, as long as it was a vocational training.
Right, and also probably also some other martial arts systems. I know, like the Filipino martial arts, a lot of them came from kind of this need to be able to train in these weapons for potential rebellions and stuff like that. And so there wasn't a full usage of knives in their system, but they were always training the empty hand to be able to also apply those techniques to knives and sticks and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I think you're right. It's like this material reality. Weapons was a big deal. So how did we start developing some of the Bagua weapons? What are some of the more notable ones?
Well, the people were, I mean, Deng Hai Chuan, the founder of Bagua, was a Prince Su Wang's tax collector. And that meant going outside of the wall and trying to collect taxes from guys who didn't exactly want to know that some nobleman they'd never seen actually owned their land and wanted some taxes. So again, he wasn't doing that empty handed. And although Liu Jingru tells us that his basic public weapon and what he actually would have used most of the time was the jian, or straight sword,
Mm,
but he's noted for his personal weapon, which at that point no one used but him. I don't think he had to retire before anybody else ever got to use the deer horn knives.
mm,
But that's the most unique weapon in Bagua, was the personal weapon of the founder, the deer horn knives, that are like two crescents that cross and go around. And they're amazing. I mean, they've got 13 attacking surfaces on that weapon. There's 4 points and 9 edges
wow.
on that weapon. And it was also noted for the 5 animals, the 4 animals. The top was like a deer horn. The way that one zigzags through was like a snake. The curve in the center was considered the bear's back. The bottom was the fish tail. And the opening was the phoenix eye.
Mm,
So there's a lot of symbology and a lot of cutting surfaces in that thing. And with the top and bottom, you could catch. And they were two-handed weapons. I mean, they're known mostly as the deer horn knives for the way the top is shaped, but they were also sometimes called the Mandarin duck knives, just because they were always used in pairs. And apparently, Mandarin ducks sort of marry for life, and you
walking
always
pairs.
see them in pairs. So they're called the Mandarin duck knives also,
Mm,
and they've been called the crescent moon knives. But they're very unique to Bagua. Very unique to Bagua. In fact, Liu Jingru once said, of course, translated through Tina after she got done laughing, but Liu Jingru once said, uh, the deer horn knives are strictly a Bagua weapon. They were made to go with Bagua. They only fit with Bagua.
Mm.
Why, if you should try them with some system other than Bagua, it'd be all stupid looking, like in that movie, referring to Crouching Tiger, where the Southern Shaolinist uses deer horn knives. It'd be all stupid looking, like that movie. Um, so that they are very unique and they fit perfectly with the twisting, coiling, circling, continuous movement of Bagua.
Mm.
And there are numerous stories of Dong Hai Chuan getting caught by surprise when he's out collecting taxes and can get to his deer horn knives quicker than he can his sword. So he pulls out his deer horn knives and defeats 8, 10, 12, you know how legends go, people with his deer horn knives. But he was a very large guy for the day. And with these particular razor sharp, curvy, pointy weapons, he was apparently very, very deadly.
So he basically, I mean, he created the deer horn knife or the usage of the deer horn knife, rather. Um, and so, yeah, like you're saying, it could be seen used by others, but it was founded in a Bagua by Bagua um, background. And what about you? You kind of said it a little bit before, but what about the coiling and circling motion of Bagua? Um, what about the design of the deer horn knives? Really, how do they play into one another?
Well, it fits the curves, and any two-handed weapon fits Bagua nicely.
Mm.
You know, the double weapons, they work quite well. And of course, with all double weapons, your basic technique is to deflect, block, or trap with the first one, and then attack with the second one. And Bagua's got a lot of ways to deflect and trap and block with all those different angles coming off from it.
Mm. And did were there a lot of forms developed with it, or was it just simply what we were doing, empty hand, now putting a weapon in our hands and applying the same principles?
No, no, there's both. Like BB Chan told us we could just take the deer horn knives and do our basic 8 palm changes with the deer horn knives in our hand, which we did, and it worked out quite well. He also had a deer horn knife set. He didn't teach it when I was training with him. He may have done it later when he started opening up and teaching more stuff. Whereas Liu Jingru, our teacher now that Tina and I are formal disciples of in Beijing, absolutely has his deer horn knife set. And it's a specific set. It's done with the deer horn knives. We do it. Both Tina and I do it. I think Jonathan knows it. You can find Liu Jingru himself doing it on YouTube. Very, very interesting.
Cool. We'll try to get that into the show notes. See if we can track down that video. Awesome. So, what other weapons do we have coming out of this system?
Well, Yin Fu, his first Bagua student and one of the two most famous Bagua students, used what was known as the Bagua needles, which was a narrow, round piece of metal, 8, 10, 12 inches long, with a point on each side and a ring that would go on your middle finger. So you'd wear it across your palm with a ring on your middle finger. And the whole thing is you could use it for thrusting, or you could spin it and catch it in your hand and use it for like just stabbing, or you could spin it and catch between your hand and the knife and use it for locking.
Mm.
And originally it was a naval weapon because the thing is, the nature of it is there's no water displacement and it's attached to your hands. So when sailors would swim to another ship to attack it, they could swim with no water displacement and have this tremendous little weapon when they got there. So it originally started as a naval weapon, and it fit Yin Fu's style because, as I mentioned, Yin Fu's style was based on Lohan, and the piercing palm was one of his um, most prolific techniques within his system. And this Bagua needles fit perfectly for the piercing palm. There's a story of at one point he was a friend of the head of the Eastern Beijing granary system, and they were having a grain war with the Western Beijing granary system, and it was getting violent. So the Eastern guy went to his friend, the Bagua master, and said, "Can you help me out?" And he said, "Sure," and did some threatening stuff to the other guy. So they went off and hired a swordsman named Yang, who is noted to be a sword killer. And sure enough, he waited, and at one point he tried to waylay Yin Fu and caught Yin Fu without any other weapons except his needles, which is easy to carry, so he carried them all the time. And he actually managed to deflect a sword and stab the guy in the neck with the needles and kill him dead as a doornail.
Oh wow.
After which the Western granaries quit their bothering of the Eastern granaries completely.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and they're pretty. I mean, they look cool. I've seen you have a few in your house, but you're right. They can conceal so easily, so it makes sense to be able to walk on your body with it or go swimming. Nice. And then do we have any kind of um, sword usage or anything like that in Bagua?
Oh yeah, it's absolute. There's straight sword, there's broadsword. They use a sword and a spear like anyone else. And of course, also unique to Bagua, but almost so unique it doesn't exist barely, is the elbow knives,
Right.
which were originally an infantry weapon. Which famous General Yu Fe, who, like I mentioned in Xing Yi, theoretically invented Xing Yi and Eagle Claw and Eight Brocade and God knows what else he didn't really invent. But he did invent taking these big knives with a little curve and holding them in the backhand slash thing and having his infantrymen roll under the cavalry horses and slash their bellies to take down the horse as a way that infantry could neutralize cavalry. Now, when you think about it, there's no way they were doing that at full gallop, but what I would imagine is the cavalry would run into a wall of shield and spears, and then while they were hung up, these guys would come out and roll under the horses.
Yeah.
But it was quite effective, and that's where the elbow knives came from. In Bagua, who knows how he picked them up, but somehow Chunting Hua was carrying elbow knives the day that he died, the day he was killed in the Box Rebellion. And seeing as how elbow knife forms are rare to non-existent, I assume that just he's going out the door that day and things are rough in town. The foreign troops are all there and revolutionaries are fighting with him here and there. And you never know what's going to happen. And he said, I think I'll take these today, and took his elbow knives. And then on the way home from work, remember he worked at an eyeglass shop, was Chunting Hua's eyeglass shop, which happened to be on the street of the hotel that we stay in Beijing, Chongmen Y. But
Oh, right, right, right. We talked about that.
yeah, but on the way home, he discovers a a platoon of German soldiers raping and looting in his neighborhood.
Mm.
And not being the calmest guy in the world, he loses it, pulls his elbow knives, and wades into a platoon of German soldiers. And when the dust settled, he was full of holes because they had rifles. But there was also 12 dead German soldiers. He took out 12 of them with his elbow knives before they managed to shoot him to death. So that made the elbow knives famous within the Chung system, if not widely practiced, still massively famous and always associated with Chen Tinghua.
Right. And for those who are listening on the podcast, I mean, basically, we're talking about this big blade that runs along your forearm to your elbow or just past your elbow. I mean, elbow strikes are so deadly for those who know how to utilize it. I mean, you see these Muay Thai guys just like breaking people's faces with their elbows. So imagine just having a big ass like machete blade coming off the forearm
And
and elbow.
and although it's famous as elbow knives because of that horse thing, when you actually use them, you got to be able to flip them from blade in front to blade back
Hmm.
so that it goes back and forth. I'm actually going to
Yeah.
be teaching some elbow knife in the winter Zoom series as something
Yeah, I was
new and
just about to
different.
ask you about that. Do you have a plan on how many weeks, or is it just going to be you're going to work with it for a bit and see how people take to it?
Well, the winter session has no exact. It's January and February, maybe March, maybe not, depending on the weather. So I know I'll have um, X number of Fridays in January and February, and I'll try and finish the form by then. we go into March, either we'll review or play with some other weapons.
Awesome. And this show's airing in January, so we're just getting started with that. So definitely follow the email in the show notes so that you can figure out how to sign up for those classes. Really affordable prices, but you're not learning Bagua elbow knives many other places online. So that's a unique kind of experience. Awesome, cool. What else? What else we got?
Well, with the swords, you had Li Suni, who was one of the Shen County guys, along with Chen Tinghua and Guo Yunshen of Xingyi and Liu Dequan and Zhang Jiaotong. We'll get to. They all came from Shen County that I mentioned was a hotbed of martial arts, a little northwest of Beijing. And Li Suni is a tall, thin fellow, and he specialized in the dadao, which is the real dadao, which of course means big knife. Keeping in mind that in Chinese, the differentiation between a knife and a sword is completely different than in the West.
Mm,
In the West, the differentiation between a knife and a sword is size. In China, anything with a single edge is a knife, no matter how big it is.
mm.
Anything with a double edge is a sword, no matter how small it is. So they're differentiated by the number of edges that they have. So what we tend to call the Chinese broadsword in China is the Chinese big knife. And you have the big knife, and then you have the Bagua big knife, which is about half again to twice as large as a regular broadsword. I mean, one of our running jokes about Bagua among the Bagua guys is we have a martial art that was founded by a eunuch, and we have more groin strikes and bigger swords than anyone else. But um, so he was noted for this giant broadsword, and where a number of the Bagua guys tried to just not be involved in the Boxer Rebellion, like Chen Tinghua was trying to do, but it didn't exactly work. And he was right in it. He was taking his school out, his troops, to go up against the Japanese and the Russians and Imperial troops when they were against them, mostly the Japanese and the Russians that were around Tianjin where he lived. He'd go up to Beijing to study with Chen Tinghua, but he actually lived in Tianjin. And he would lead his troops out. And legend has it that he was so fierce that by the end of the Boxer Rebellion, which mostly just lasted one summer, but by the end of the Boxer Rebellion, when he would appear on the field with his dadao, that sometimes troops with rifles would just turn around and run away. Didn't want anything to do with him. Um, I'm not sure the validity of that, but that's the story. The troops with rifles would run away from him when they saw him with his dadao. And
What? Yeah.
big man, giant sword, continuous movement, probably very, very difficult target to shoot. And if he got in among you, you had major problems. Um, of course, those are the days when a foreign devil was a foreign devil. It didn't matter what kind of foreign devil.
Right.
Because he had in his Boxer Rebellion days, he would wear white shirts, and some of them were stained from the cuff to the shoulders with blood stains.
Wow.
Which for the rest of his life, he kept those shirts as his mark of what he had done in the Boxer Rebellion. And some people pointed out some of that blood belonged to missionaries, not soldiers. But a
Wow.
foreign devil was a foreign devil, and the only good one was a dead one. So it didn't really matter what they were doing. If they were a foreign devil and you killed them, so much the better. Um,
Well, this is the first of the weapons that you're mentioning that isn't a two-handed weapon. So, what about Bagua lended itself to this big knife, this broadsword?
well, again, a big guy with a big knife spinning and moving all the time, also keeping the sword spinning and moving all the time, would
Mm,
create like almost a forest of steel. I mean, it's not like just chop, chop, chop. It's like it keeps moving all the time. And of course, one of the big things with a single edge with the Dow is you can back it up with the other hand because that side's not sharp. Type of
mm.
thing to cut your hand right in half with a sword with a big knife. You could do this two-handed stuff. And so a lot of stuff works with Bagua. It's just the two-handed weapons happen to work exceptionally well. You know, the deer horns, the needles, the elbow knives worked exceptionally well. But you could work just as well with a sword,
Mm.
with the broadsword. He lived to be very old, Lee Sun. He was noted for stuff like when he was an old man, he used to visit his friend who was a school teacher, and he'd go in the yard and play with the kids, and he'd wear a robe with those long sleeves that hang down, and he'd hold his arms
Not the bloody
in the
robes.
well, those were shirts, but he'd wear those to school too. He'd wear them anywhere. But this is the robe with the long sleeves that
Yes,
hang
yes.
down, and he'd stand in the heaven posture with his arms out at shoulder height and say that any kid that could touch his sleeve would get a prize. And then he would start walking in Bago with his sleeves hanging with all these kids chasing him, and none of them ever touched it. And for
Wow.
stamina, he would do it till the kids ran out of gas. And this old man was still walking around with his arms in the air, and nobody had managed to touch the sleeves yet.
I'm
And
gonna try that. I'm gonna
it
try that with
wasn't,
my daughter. Do some
and
stamina training.
it wasn't like today where everybody wins either. The story is that no kid ever managed to touch the sleeves.
All right. Awesome.
And then his friend Zhang Jiaotung was a farmer from around Shen County who knew and trained with these guys. In fact, he's one of the Liu Yongqing Xingyi guys that also learned Bagua. And as a farmer, he had a ridiculous hate for bullies because anybody that had any money used to try and bully the farmers a lot. And
Right.
he ended up with almost this fetish of hating bullies, which is quite understandable. And he moved to Tianjin also. And although he taught, he backed his teaching up with he was a peddler. He'd go out to the street where all the peddlers lined up and he'd sell whatever. He was a peddler. And when these bandits or thieves or whoever would come around to pick on the peddlers, he became the protector of the peddlers. He would immediately beat the crap out of them. And one story is these guys came from this large gang and went to shake down the peddlers, and he beat them up. And so the gang challenged him to meet them at some warehouse situation. And so he shows up, and 30 gang members show up, and they're insulted when he brings just two of his Bagua guys and him. There's three of them facing 30 of them. But he whips out his 15-foot, 20-foot bullwhip, rawhide bullwhip,
Mm.
which in legend became Zhang Jiaotung's Red Cross whip. Because what he does, whenever anybody moves for him, he would whip them twice and slash this X across their chest. It just cut them deep enough that they were bleeding from this X on the chest, and that was all there was for them. And the two other guys were, of course, if you got inside of the range of that whip, the whip didn't work. Well, the minute you got inside the range of the whip, the other two guys would move up with their swords or deer horn knives, whatever else they had, and finish you off just as you got inside the range of
Right.
the whip. Well, he was taking care of all the outside guys. And theoretically, they wasted that gang of 30 so bad that it disbanded and it was never seen on the streets of Tianjin again.
Wow.
And it's Zhang Jiaodong's Red Cross whip.
Wow. Is the whip a unique design, or is it
No, it was just
just the, the
bullwhip.
the use of it? Yeah.
It was a bullwhip. But a little subnote for that, he never taught his technique to a single student.
Mm.
He never taught it. So it didn't come down. It was just his Red Cross whip.
So there might be some Bagua
But
folks who do some kind of whip form, but it's not something that was passed down from anywhere.
yeah, I've never even seen it or heard of it. I got a grandson who's working with bullwhip now. I should get him into it. It's like,
Yeah. There you go. Awesome.
but
And we also
but yeah,
got the rooster knives, right? Those are one of. I mean, those are
yes,
beautiful looking.
Liang Jianpu was Deng Hai Chuan's last private student,
Mm.
which tells you he's from a moneyed family. That's how he got in there.
All
But
right.
he was Deng Hai Chuan's last private student. And he came up with this very unique weapon, which is kind of like a tonfa, except with one thing to hang on to. It's got a whole square,
Right.
and then it's a little bit longer than the forearm, and of course it's steel. And then on the front end, it's got this kind of leaf-shaped edge thing, and on the back end, it's got a point off your elbow. And then right where the wrist is, it's got this rooster claw, these three sharp claw things that come out.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole thing is you can spin it like a tonfa. So you put the long side out with the leaf thing, and then you spin it back and you put the pointy side out for in shorter. And if somebody's really close, you can use the claw. And he was a guy.
Was the
There's no
guy? You remember that
specific.
movie, the Golden Child with Eddie Murphy? Wasn't there a guy that used them? I feel
Not that
like
I remember, but it may have
yeah. I
been.
gotta look. I gotta look back at it. But yeah,
I
or
don't
something
don't
similar to them.
think they're rooster knives. Similar,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
Similar. I like Randy Tex Cobb in that movie. He's the
Mm-hmm.
big dumb guy that the kid makes the can
Oh
dance for
yeah.
him. Randy Tex Cobb, hell of a boxer. We're
Yep.
into boxing someday. We'll get into him. But yeah, I don't remember there being rooster knives per
Mm.
se. But Liang Zhenpu actually used them in some guard work because he was of that generation. And then Liang Zhenpu's most well-known popular student was Li Ziming. And Li Ziming uses the fire wheels, which is a circular thing with different things coming off it here and there. But I don't think Li Ziming was ever a fighter. I think he just does his fire wheel forms and whatnot. But Li Ziming was important because even during the Cultural Revolution, he's a guy with connections that got along with the government and managed to teach no matter what, and was also the founder of the Beijing Bagua Research Association, which has been the Bagua Association for a long time. Although one of Liu's former senior students at one point was the vice president of the organization. In fact, I somewhere have a membership card that I got through him. But we said to him, what do you do? And he said, well, we're an organization, so we have organizational business. But when that's done, we're like any group of martial artists to get together. Once that's over, we sit around and argue about whose master's best.
Yep.
But Li Ziming founded that, which helps maintain Bagua in the Beijing area and China in
Mm.
general. Beijing Bagua Research Association.
Mm.
And like I
And
said,
you
he
also,
used the fire
yeah.
wheels.
You also
And
mentioned.
then
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
And then, of course, there is everybody use the straight sword
Right. That's what I
and
was
the
gonna ask about.
spear. So, like Liu Jingru has a straight sword form that's very, very Bagua-esque, which myself, Tina, and many of our students do the straight sword form. Very nice form. Um, Complicated enough, nowhere near as complicated as that Northern Wu form with the straight sword. Northern Wu is ridiculous, but a really, really nice form, Bagua form, straight sword form. And like I said, Liu tells us that Deng Hai Chuan's actual public weapon and the weapon that he used the most was a
Right.
straight sword. That the Deerhorn knives were his personal weapon. And then, of course, anybody who was doing anything as far as guarding, soldiering, and whatnot had to know spear. And Liu also has a spear form that we learned at one point, which kind of looks like anybody's spear form, except for the points where it circles and spins a couple times. But also, I noticed though at one point they taught us the basic techniques, and at one point our Li Gunyen, who we're doing Tai Chi with now that Li Bingsu is retired, taught us the basic techniques of Northern Wu style spear, and of
Mm.
course the founder of Wu style being an Imperial Guard. And interestingly enough, the basic techniques are almost pretty much the same, and there's only like four of them. So in use, the spear was kept pretty simple.
Mm.
But everybody tends to make spear forms, and Bagua does have a very nice looking spear form also.
Yeah, I've seen photos of you and other students in China visits doing some of the spear stuff, and it looks really cool. I mean also too the spinning motions are so those are very small spins and very fast for deflection and things like this. I'm assuming.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's Spear's got a lot of palm down to palm up spins. It seems to be one of the basic techniques that go on. In Wu style, we're actually taught a little four move two person, and a bunch of it is one person's palm down, the other one's palm up, and then they reverse. Because if you don't reverse, the guy will come over your spear and be set for the thrust.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, tons of wrist work. All us Americans with our carpal tunnel can benefit from doing some of this weapon work.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So, um, with learning different Bagua forms, with these various weapons, how do you what's similar, what's different from other martial arts systems? Obviously, the application of a lot of the coiling. Where does the internal principles come into play with the weapons?
Well, everything we do is with internal principles. As I mentioned before, you can use internal power development in anything. So everything that we do is supposed to use the basic principles of internal power. And with Bagua, again, it's a constant movement, constant twisting, coiling, circling movements that make it unique. And with any weapons in Chinese style, the idea of the weapon is to extend your energy beyond your body.
Mm,
That your energy, as opposed to stopping at your chi field or aura level, that you extend your energy through the weapon. And very interestingly enough, in one of my teachers, I learned that the difference between wooden weapons and steel weapons energetically is it's a major, major difference in that trees are alive, wood's dead. You
right.
cut the tree down, you just killed it. So when you're using wooden weapons, you're extending your energy through and around the weapon, period. But then the idea is to learn how to extend your energy through and around the weapon. Whereas with steel, and steel in particular, and the higher grade steel, the higher the effect, is steel has an energy of its own, which connects with the user's energy to create a third type of energy. And once you feel, it's very interesting. And low grade steel, I don't know, I've never been able to feel it at all in low grade steel, but
Right.
the higher the grade of steel, the more you can feel this.
Hmm.
And there's a couple theories as to why this happened. One is that steel is tempered by people, and the energy of the people that are tempering the steel goes into it. The other one is steel is carbon based. We are carbon based, and therefore the carbons of the steel connect with the carbons of us. But for whatever reason, the energy of high grade steel connects with the energy of the user and creates a third energy. And it's really bizarre. In some Chinese system, it's called killing chi. I don't know, I tend to refer to it as the joy of slicing. But but it's interesting that with a high grade steel, you can definitely feel that you have this different type of energy
Well,
that
well,
is
speaking to the,
created. But
yeah, speaking to that, but not going too far off topic. Can you mentioned the chi field? We've never talked about that before. What does that mean?
well, we'll get into chi some point. Chi is life force energy.
Mm-hmm.
The big thing, you have chi, you're alive. You run out of chi. The day you completely run out of chi is called death.
Right.
But the idea is to learn to increase your storage so that you put off the death thing. Like one of BP Chan's adages, being a very smart guy, was he said, everybody gets the invitation, but we do our exercise, so ours comes a little later. And that's all about chi storage. And then you learn to open up the channel so it flows freely. And there are certain subtle things, like I'm talking about this energy with weapons, but
Right.
generally, chi is not all that useful for fighting. And the whole thing of people doing chi stuff without touching people is complete BS.
Oh, right. Yeah. We'll
That's
definitely
why
get
these
into
guys.
that.
That's why these guys keep getting beat up by regular sport fighters.
Yep.
It's not. You want to be healthy to fight, but and chi is very important for health and longevity. But
So with this extension of energy through a weapon like a high grade steel weapon, uh, how do you describe that? What does that feel like? Is it just feeling like you're more connected to the weapon that you're wielding, or?
Well, I find you're more connected and it makes you happy.
Mm,
Like I said, the joy of slicing.
yeah, for sure. And in the Whirling Circles book, um, your Bagua book, you have I think, was it chapter
We have
5
a
or 6 or?
we have a chapter on weapons in general,
Yeah.
and then we have Tina showing Liu Jingru's deerhorn knife set.
Yeah,
So
and
we
she
have
goes
the
through the whole
complete
set. Yeah.
deerhorn. We have the complete deerhorn knife set in there, as well as a chapter on the stuff we're just talking about, the different masters and the different weapons.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really awesome resource. Obviously, it's good also to be accompanied with teaching, but yeah, it's a great resource as people are trying to figure out how to use the deer horn knives. I would imagine too the a lot of these weapons are hard to make, right? I mean, they look these weird, unique shapes and everything, and so is there a big market to access these weapons online? I know we
Uh,
talked about the elbow knives are hard to find, but how about these other ones?
you can buy the Dadao and the deerhorn knives at certain martial arts places. Wing Lam, I'm sure, has them. Karate Mart may have them. Some of the higher end weapons, martial arts weapons places, have deerhorn knives and the Dadao.
Right.
And of course, the straight sword, the broadsword, regular broadsword. There is also a Bagua which is about twice the size of a normal Jian.
Mm.
But I'm not sure if that was traditional or just somebody decided they had the big knife, they should have the big sword. Um, but they're out there. There are those also, and you can find them.
But
Um,
quality matters, right? Because you told me a story about some of these breaking.
yeah, yeah, quality absolutely matters, and they are really difficult to make. I know that knife making show, Forged in Fire.
Yes.
They had an episode on making deerhorn knives, and people are having a hell of a time getting them sharp. And at least one set, maybe two sets, broke on the people, and so it's not an easy thing to make.
Yeah. Yeah. I just started watching that show. I haven't seen the episode yet, but I'm gonna try to access it. I think it's in their 4th season or something like that. But it's pretty cool that they were able to showcase them on that show. But you could theoretically grab any kind of quality if you're just using it to learn forms, and or maybe you're just having it as decorative pieces in your house or something like that. But of course, getting better quality is always nice for sure. But those weapons can become pricey, right? A pricey habit.
Yes, yes, they can. Perform wise, I recently discovered I'd never seen before. There's actually somebody out there selling polypropylene deerhorn knives,
Mm,
which I'm like, it means at some point I can have light contact sparring with deerhorn knives versus the polypropylene swords that we have. So I was really happy to find somebody who's actually making those.
what was
And
the
of course,
price
the
point like for
deerhorn,
those? Because those are something that you could get for like a whole class potentially.
they were, I don't know, 25, $30 a
Yeah,
pair.
that's great. That's
They
great.
weren't that bad. Of course, and they're the smaller style. The whole thing with deerhorn knives is they come from, about 12 inches to about 24. There are various size deerhorn knives. One must assume that Dung Hai Chuan probably carried a fairly small pair because he was noted for carrying them under his robes.
Mm,
So I don't think a big giant set would have worked that way. But they come in all different sizes and also
awesome.
slightly different shapes. The original, the two crescents are exactly the same size. But then they
Uh,
have one where one crescent's smaller. Then they have one where one of the points that comes off the crescent is longer. So they're also slightly different styles of deerhorn knives also.
mm. So these are some of the unique weapons that are associated with Bagua. But what about other weapons? Can we use Bagua principles and training with other kind of combat knives and things like that?
Bagua it fits very well with any knife. Knife training and Bagua, they just fit together very nicely. The same way, like I said, the elbow knives haven't to be specific, but you can use knives of any size and discover that, the thrusting, the coil thrusting, the hand cuts, the hand slashes, the movements of Bagua lend themselves to knife work very, very nicely.
Awesome, awesome. And so, with the classes that you're running, with the elbow knife classes going through the forum, what can people expect and what would people need? Because we're saying that the elbow knives are kind of hard to find. So, how can someone participate in those classes?
You can use anything. I mean, you can use a couple of butcher knives from the kitchen. You can use a couple of rulers or yardsticks, depending on your size. You can use anything. It doesn't really have to be elbow knives per se. Anything that vaguely fits the bill. Like I said, a couple of rulers would work just fine.
Yeah, we were joking about how if I start taking my wife's knives and I start like playing around with them, doing some kung fu, she'll get pissed off at me. Stop messing up my knives. Or if she walks in on me and I'm over here playing with her kitchen knives, she might, get a little concerned about my mental health.
Yeah, butcher knives are great though.
Yeah,
The right size butcher knife is almost perfect.
yeah. Well, I was doing I started the Tai Chi sword with you all, and that's I mean it's awesome. Um, I've noticed though, I mean, you kind of have to have, I think, maybe you don't have to, but I think it's helpful to have a base in the empty hand variation before you get into the use with the weapon, right? I feel like if I didn't have a little bit of a base in Tai Chi empty hand, the sword would probably be that much more difficult. Or do you think it's not necessary?
Um, it's really better to have a base in the empty hand. But I have known people that just are familiar with other martial arts systems, so they're familiar with movement, have been able to pick up the sword and do it fairly quickly. But a completely inexperienced person in everything will have a hard time picking up a weapon. And that particular sword set is ridiculously complicated anyway.
Right, right.
So, my story with that, I learned it thoroughly 3 times. And each time, if I didn't practice it every day, it went away. And so I'd learn that set thoroughly. I'd have it down. And then I'd get some new Bagua Xingyi and I'd practice the hell out of new Bagua and Xingyi for a couple of months and turn around the sword set was gone. And after I did that 3 times, I'm like, Tina can teach this set. I've got I've got Bagua and Xingyi sword and a bunch of other weapons. I think I'll leave the Tai Chi sword to Tina.
Nice, awesome. So yeah, so someone doesn't need to necessarily be a Bagua practitioner to participate in the classes, right? The elbow knife classes.
Yeah, it's going to be a relatively simple set.
Awesome. Cool. And like we said before in our last week's episode, um, you know, we with the winter season upon us, the Zoom classes have increased. You talked about last week some of the new classes, but for those who weren't able to tune in last week, can you go over again some of the classes that you're offering this winter?
Well, we're going to have our usual Zoom classes Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And during the warm months, we've been having classes in the yard for Wednesday and Friday. And what we're going to do is replace those yard classes at the same prices as the yard classes with specific Zoom classes that I'm doing 4 classes that have never been done before, at least by us. And Tina's doing another sword class, which is always helpful for the people doing sword. And so on Wednesdays at 6 o'clock, I'm going to do the 8 strategies of Chung Style Bagua. And then at 7 o'clock, I'm going to do a Chinese philosophy class. And then Fridays at 6 o'clock, I'm going to do a Fighting for Health Principles and Foundations of Internal Fighting. And at 7 o'clock, Tina will do her Northern Wu style Taiji sword. And then at 8 o'clock, I will do the elbow knives.
Awesome, awesome. So yeah, so anyone who's listening to this show, if you're interested in learning some of the elbow knives and other, the Tai Chi sword and other things, with Frank and the Wudang Physical Culture Association, definitely follow the email in the show notes to contact Tina directly. And again, we talked about how affordable it is and a rare opportunity to be able to access this stuff from the comfort of your home. And I mean, that you probably do various workshops throughout the year. This year being harder because of the pandemic, but different weapon workshops and seminars throughout the year. So if people are interested in learning some of these other weapons that we've talked about, there will probably be opportunity, pending this pandemic gets resolved to some degree, that you'll be able to teach those in person again, or maybe even online. I know it's hard to teach a longer format online, but that might be some opportunity too.
Yep, they'll definitely be available one way or the other.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome, cool. Well, thanks so much, Frank. It was great to hear about these different weapons. Also, too, we encourage people to follow the link in the show notes to purchase the book, Whirling Circles. You got the book to show off to people in front of you. I got it too. Whirling Circles of Baguazhang, and in there, I'm pretty sure it's chapter 5, where Frank goes deeper into the origins and histories of these different weapons. There we go, and then the whole set of the deer horn knives that we were speaking to is in there, which is awesome, so that people can start working on that as well. Any final thoughts on Bagua weapons, Frank?
They're unique, they're interesting, they're fun. I suggest that people, if they're interested in weapons at all, will like to get into some Bagua weapons.
Awesome, cool. All right, Frank. Well, thanks so much, and we'll see you next week, of course.
Okay, thank you, Sean.
All right, thanks.